Today's shiur begins 16 lines from the top of the Omid. If it makes it any easier for you, try to notice a diamond around the name Ameimar. On the side of the Gemara, you see the nosei, mivneh. The topic heading is the nosei. Mivneh is a structural note, which we've combined into one notation. A diamond appears, and it highlights Shnei Meimros Shel Ameimar, two comments made by Ameimar, b'matzav horegel b'shas chalitza, regarding the situation, the nature of the foot of the yavam, at the time that the shoe is to be removed. She'idchof horegel b'karka. One point is that he is to apply a certain amount of pressure onto the floor, onto the ground, so that the Yevamos, the sister-in-law, is going to have to make some kind of effort in order to remove the shoe. And number two, shelo lach loitz meregel hafucha shigav shelo klapi karka, not to do a chalitza, a shoe removal from a foot there's an abnormality here where the foot is inverted so that the top of the foot actually is facing the ground. So some type of abnormality, but that being the case, that would not be an acceptable type of chalitza if the foot is in that state. The Gemara, Omar Ameimar, Haiman de Cholitz, Tzorech limidchesei lekarei. One who was participating in chalitza, the surviving brother of the deceased, he has to be standing on his foot which means that certainly he's not allowed to raise his foot in the air to make it easier for him to remove the shoe. That absolutely not. He's supposed to push on his foot into the ground. Of course, not to the extent that she can't pick up his foot, but pressure should be applied to the ground. Omar le Rav Ashi Meimar v'hotanya. But did we not learn bein oimed, bein yoshev, bein muteh, that chalitza can take place whether he's standing, sitting, or leaning? So the Gemara says that is true. However, emo uli oilam dedochis lekarei. However, whatever position the rest of his body is in, his foot though should be with pressure onto the ground. V'omar Ameimar, Haiman de maski al lichsa de kare. One who maski walks on lichsa de kare. It's a reference to he walks on the top of his foot. In other words, his foot is inverted so that as he walks along, the top of his foot is really facing the ground. Lo chalitz. He is not in a position to participate in chalitza. Omar le Rav Ashi Lameimar. So Rav Ashi asks for Tanya, smuchos horaglayim. The Tanaic source that we saw at the end of our previous shiur spoke about the removal of smuchos horaglayim, and that's something that's worn by someone whose feet are basically inoperative, dysfunctional. My lav de cholitz ba ihu. A person who wears smuchos haraglayim is someone whose foot in fact is twisted. So does the source not in fact refer to the removal of his smuchos haraglayim, this called foot support, which is in effect his shoe, and he is a person whose foot is twisted and it's still okay? The Gemara says, lo, that's not the case. We're not talking about removal of the smuchos haraglayim, this type of foot apparatus, from someone whose foot is contorted. Rather, the yohiv lei liacher v'cholitz. The smuchos haraglayim are actually given to someone else who has a normal foot, and it's removed from his foot. So it's a type of foot gear that is currently being worn by a yavam who has normal feet. Omar Rav Ashi, Lamai dekomar Ameimar. According to Ameimar, the following individuals, their names are Bar Uba and Bar Kipuf. Lav Bar Uba Chalitz, Lav Bar Kipuf Chalitz. These two people are featured in another Gemara in Maseches Moed Katan, where they had been responsible for causing Rav Ashi a sense of anguish, and as a result they were punished with their feet inverting. So Bar Uba and Bar Kipuf have inverted feet. So according to a Maimar, they would not be suitable to participate in a chalitza. Min Harkuva Lamata. So we had seen that chalitza kshera. If a person is an amputee, but from below the arkuva, below the knee, so there's a stump and a shoe is removed from that stump, that's okay. That's an acceptable chalitza. However, if we were taught min arkuva ulamalo chalitza psula. However, if the amputee is such that it's from above the knee and a shoe were attached to the stump that high up, that would not be an effective chalitza. Minhi, we raise a contradiction. This posuk talks about Aliyah Soregel, the thrice-year pilgrimage to Jerusalem, and we call it Aliyah Soregel. And you find the word Rigolim in the Torah. It says Shalosh Rigolim Tochog. And Rashi quotes that posuk. And so the word Rigolim, Prat Lebale Kaven, to the exclusion of people who are amputees, who wear prosthetic legs. They are exempt from the mitzvah of Re'iyah. And Rashi adds, Sheptumiriya, Almo Shoik Lav Regel Hu. A Baal Kav is someone who's going to wear a prosthetic leg as a result of his the foot was amputated, and he has a part of his leg that extends beneath the knee, but nevertheless the pasuk is exempting him from the thrice-year pilgrimage, Aliyas HaRegel. So what do we see from here? That the shok, the calf of the foot, is not considered a regel. It's not considered a foot, and the pasuk says that the shoe must be removed me'al raglo. So the Gemara answers, that is true. In terms of the pilgrimage, Aliyas HaRegel, a person who is a Baal Kav is exempt because he doesn't have a regel, he doesn't have a foot. However, when it comes to chalitza, he is still acceptable to participate in the shoe removal. Shiny hach, the case of yibum is different, of chalitza is different. Tiftiv me'al raglo. It says the shoe is removed from above his foot. In other words, there's a certain amount of leeway here, or it's more inclusive than the halacha of Aliyas HaRegel, so that even if he is lacking the foot, as long as there is the shok, the part of the foot beneath the knee, is there, he can do the chalitza. The Gemara asks, if you're justifying chalitza because of the pasuk of me'al raglo, lamalo min ha'arkuvanami, me'al raglo means above his foot. So let's say he's an amputee from above the knee. That should also be okay, and yet we learned that that's not okay. The Gemara answers, me'al v'lo me'al de me'al. The Torah says you remove the shoe from above his foot, but not from above that which is above. In other words, the foot is, in your mind's eye, divided into sections. You have your basic standard foot, then the section that's the calf, the section between we'll say the ankle and the knee, and then the section above the knee, the thigh. That already, if you're dealing with the thigh, that's called above that which was above. And that's beyond the purview or the range suggested in the pasuk for chalitza. Omar Rav Papa Shma Mina. We shall conclude from what we have taught now and what we've learned now, that from beneath the knee, that is considered kosher because that's the immediate section above the foot. So we have to conclude from that, hayistavira, the ankle of a person, ad ara nochis. In terms of halacha, now I cannot say that I've checked this out with people that are expert in bone structure and anatomy. But as far as the Chazal are concerned, even though technically speaking the ankle might be made of several bones, but the bones there are attached to one another with cartilage, and what other tissue might be there. So in halacha we view the ankle as a singular entity from the top of the ankle to the floor, to the ground. That's what and why is that? Why is that important for us to establish? If you're going to say that the ankle bone is made of sections and it's considered separate pieces, ihu me'al, then the istavira, the ankle, then is considered above the foot. The shoka me'al de me'al, and then the shok, the calf, that would be me'al de me'al, that's above the above. So once again, the ankle bone is that which goes from what we would call the ankle down to the floor. It's considered one bone, and that's considered the equivalent of the regel, the foot. Because if you are going to view the ankle bone as in sections, even though anatomically maybe it is, but halachically we're not going to say that. And as I suggested before, that all the various cartilage and tissue connections establish it as one entity, one unit, and therefore that is all considered basic regel, and the shok, that the bone above the ankle, is considered me'al. Omar Ravashi, afilu tema mifsek pasik. Ravashi feels you can even say that the ankle is viewed as several different sections. However, called the bahadi kara, anything that's on the same plane as the foot, kekara domi, has the status of the foot, and not, and we thereby don't encounter the problem of me'al de me'al. Once again, even if you say that the ankle is viewed as something in several sections. Minar kuva lamala. Before we continue, notice there's a flurry of triangles that appear. On the side, we have under our nosei, mivne heading, the triangles introduce kushios, questions, mipsukim, based on verses, al ha dekotani b'mishnah de regel hainu minar kuva lamata. We're going to be questioning, based on psukim, that which the Mishnah established, that the term regel is applicable to that which is below the knee. So you can rest assured that from these psukim we're going to refer to different parts of the human anatomy that appear above the knee, and yet the term regel appears. So we're going to have to square that away with where there's our Tanaic source with the psukim. Mosiv Rav Kahana ubeshilyaso hayoitzeis mibein ragleha. Translated, the pasuk refers to the afterbirth that emerges from a woman from between her legs. Notice the word ragleha, and everyone is familiar with the female anatomy. The afterbirth emerges from that part of her body that's described here as mibein ragla, that's much further above the area of the calf. So why does the Mishnah say that min ha'akuva ulamala is not considered raglo, when here you see regel being referred to that area of the woman where birth takes place? Omar Abaye. Abaye explains that Bishah Shekiras Leiled, when a woman is in the travails of birth, Koras means she bends over to give birth. Noyeses akeveha beyarchoiseha violetis. She actually folds her feet in such a way that her heels are are folded opposite her thighs. So if one bends their legs backwards, so that the heel is let's say if one is kneeling, so in a position like that, the leg, or the foot, that is more accurately the foot, the heel is actually opposite the thigh, and Violetis, and that's how she gives birth. So it comes out that the birth is actually literally mi bein ragleha, literally between her feet, because of the bent foot position. So that you don't see from here that the thighs are considered regel. Toshma, the pasuk says lo oso raglov velo oso sfomoy. Without getting into the details and the historical background to this particular pasuk, it's a reference to someone who had not shaved the hair of his legs nor his sfomo. Sfomo is the area around one's mouth, the mustache. So that what we're describing here, he didn't remove his hair. It's a reference to we'll call it the area around the organs of gender. That hair, that's what the pasuk is referring to. He had not removed the hair from there. So what do we see? We see that part of the anatomy where the organs of gender are found is called regel. So it's much higher up than the knee, and it's still called regel. The Gemara says you can't use this pasuk as proof, because this pasuk is actually simply striving for say refined speech. Lishna ma'alya. Lishna ma'alya is refined speech or a euphemism. So that regel here is simply a borrowed expression. It doesn't reflect the true meaning of regel. The true meaning of regel, though, is, as we said before, the area beneath the knee, and certainly the foot itself is called the regel, and the area that we refer to as the calf, that is above the regel. All that's the kosher range for chalitza, but above the knee is called me'al de me'al. It's not regel. Toshma vayovo Shaul lahosech es raglov. The pasuk describes Shaul entering a cave to relieve himself. Lahosech es raglov, so that the area of the anatomy in which waist emerges, that area is referred to as raglov. So it's way above the knee. So why does the Mishnah say once again that minar kuvu l'malo is not considered removal of the shoe from the regel, when you see above the knee is called regel? Once again, lishna ma'alya. The pasuk is using the word raglov, but only in a borrowed fashion, in a euphemistic fashion, because it's striving for refined language. But that's not the technical definition of regel. Toshma. This pasuk is in the context of Eglon, the king of Moab. It says, Ach mesich hu raglov b'cheder hamakira. So again, you see mesich is raglov, and here, similar to what we suggested before, that the area where the human waist emerges is called regel, which once again is way above the knee. The Gemara says lishna ma'alya. Again, this is an example of a euphemistic term. The Gemara asks a question. This is a pasuk dealing with Sisera, who had intimacy with Yoel. Again, we're not getting into all of the historical context and the storyline of the verses, but sufficient for us is to simply realize that the pasuk Bein Ragleha is a reference to intimacy. So what do we see? We see that the area in which intimacy is taking place is called Ragleha, and that's way above the knee. The Gemara says Lishna Me'alya. This again is an example of a euphemistic turn of phrase. Now, since we mentioned the intimacy between Sisera, who was a military official, a general who was warring against the Jews, and through a subterfuge, Yoel killed him. Gemara gets off onto that topic. HaRav Yohanan Sheva Be'ilos Bo'el Oisoi Rosha Ba'oisa Hayom. In that encounter of intimacy, there were 7 acts of intimacy conducted between Yoel and Sisera. Osa Rosh means that wicked man. That's a reference to Sisera. Shenemar, and the number 7 is hinted to in the following pasuk: Bein Ragleha, Korah, Nofal, Shochav, Bein Ragleha. These are all verbs indicating, each verb indicating a separate act of intimacy. So that Korah, he bent over, Nofal, he fell, Shochav, he lay, Bein Ragleha, between her legs, Korah, Nofal, Basher, Korah, Shom, Nofal, Shodud. So we've used numbering in our marked Gemara so that you can see 7 verb forms indicating the 7 acts of intimacy. The pasuk praises Yoel for her bravery and for her initiative in effect helping to save the nation of Israel from this enemy. And so the Gemara asks, V'hol komes hanya me'avera. The Tosfos explains the basis of this question is, why does the Novi praise her when she was in effect benefiting from that which is sinful? You have a Jewish woman having intimacy with a Gentile man, and that's considered that's something that ordinarily speaking is forbidden. And how can that lead to a praiseworthy attitude toward her? Omar Rabbi Yochanan Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. So the following is to be known. Kol toivason shel rishoyim. What one might describe as benefit that one receives from the wicked. Ra'ah, we're at the top of Omid Beis. Ra'ah he eitzel tzadikim. It's considered abominable. It's considered disgusting in the eyes of tzadikim, in the eyes of the righteous. So Rashi at the top says, Ra'ah he shesoinim harishoyim v'kotzenav shetzadik b'hana'osan. The righteous is abhorred by by that which you would describe as pleasurable when the source of it is a wicked man. Hilkoch lav hanohi. Therefore, since it's abhorrent in the eyes of the righteous, it's not considered pleasurable, and hence we're praising a woman who really put herself out and experienced no pleasure. And this concept is borne out by the following: Shenemar Hishomilcha Pentadabir Imankiv Mitoy Vad Ra. Lavan in Sefer Bereshis was warned by the Almighty not to speak with Yankiv, whether it be good things or bad things. So Lavan, who was a wicked man, was warned not to speak kindly, nor wickedly, nor harshly to Yankiv. Bishlama Ra L'chayi. I understand why the Almighty would warn Lavan not to speak evil to him. L'chayi means fine, that's reasonable, it makes sense. Elotoiv amai lo. Why shouldn't Lavan speak words of kindness and grace to Jacob? Eloshma mino. We can see from here, toivosan sherishoyim ro he eitzel tzadikim. The pleasure, the benefit of the wicked in the eyes of the righteous is abhorrent. The Gemara raises a question. Bishlama Hasam. I understand over there by Yankiv and Lavan, where Lavan is warned not to speak any words, even positive words. Dilma matkir le shma davidis kechavim. There is the suspicion that he might make reference to his idols. Rashi says Lama ganafta es elehai, where Lavan put the question to Yaakov, why did you steal my gods? So in that context, those were his idols in that context, so that any speech of Lavan would result, even if it's positive, would result in his making reference to his idols. So that I understand. Ella hacha my ro'ika, but here with regard to Yoel and Sisera, what's the ra? What's the abomination? Answer: the kashodi bo zuhama is in the context of their intimacy. He, this heathen idol worshipper general, would be casting into her zuhama, filth. The Omer Rabbi Yochanan, b'shah sheba nochash al chava. Here we're dealing with something that is probably a very Kabbalistic, mystical area of thought, but that's beyond the purview of Gemara marking. So we're going to have to limit ourselves to the translation, and with that we'll at least get a certain sense of appreciation of what the Gemara is saying, even though there is quite a bit more to delve into. So Rav Yochanan tells us that when the Nachash is often translated as the serpent, the snake of the story in the Garden of Eden. Personally, I don't like translating and limiting myself to the literal translation, because it oftentimes can conjure up images of what we associate with, we'll say in this case, snakes and serpents. What the Nachash was at that time, even if it was a type of snake, the Gemara in Sanhedrin tells us that it took on it today has a different form than it had then, without getting into detail. But it says, Rabbi Yochanan tells us that when the Nachash had intimacy with Chava, with the wife of Adam and Chava, when the Nachash had intimacy with her, Hitil ba zuama, he cast into her this entity called zuama, filth. Yisrael Shamdal Har Sinai, the Jewish people who were present at Mount Sinai for the giving of the Torah, Posca zuamasan, that filth element departed from them. Oivdei kechavim shalom du Bar Sinai, the idol worshippers who were not at Mount Sinai, lo posca zuamasan, that element of filth never departed. So Sisera, who was an idol worshipper, a descendant of idol worshippers, his forebearers were not at Mount Sinai, so he had within him that same zuhama that was communicated from the original Nachash to Chava. The Gemara will continue with a quote from the Mishnah. At the same time, we also have a topic heading which features choltz on the side, the nosei, choltza b'minol she'eino shelo. The chalitza was done, she removed a shoe from the surviving brother, a shoe that was not his. So we quote from the Mishnah, Choltza b'minol she'eino shelo v'chulei, Tanu Rabbanan. And now we have a Tanaic source that elaborates, and it works with a pasuk. The pasuk is found, and we've noted it on the side of the Gemara, from Sefer Dvarim, Perek Chafhei, pasuk Tes. The pasuk says, "V'niksha yevimto elov li'enei hazakenim v'choltza na'aloi me'al ragloi v'yarku b'fanav." The woman, the Yevama, draws near unto the sages, the rabbis, and she removes his shoe from upon his foot, and v'yarku b'fanav, and she spits. V'onsa v'omra, and she declares, she announces, Kocha ye'aseh lo ish asher lo yivne es beis ochiv. Thusly is done to a man that does not maintain, doesn't build the name of his brother. And that's a function of his not willing to marry her, not to do yibum with her. So he's not maintaining the name of his deceased brother through reproduction with her. V'nikra shmo b'Yisrael beis chalutz hanal. That's in pasuk Yud, and there is a proclamation made that he is called beis chalutz hanal. Now the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan, na'aloi. As you can see, that word appeared in pasuk Tes. Ein li elo na'aloi. From this I would think that it has to be his shoe, only his shoe. Na'al shel kol adam minayin, a shoe belonging to anyone else. From where do I know that that's acceptable? Talmud lomar na'al mikol makom. You have the word na'al in pasuk tes, and the word na'al is repeated in pasuk yud. So that is inclusive of even a shoe that is not his. Im kain ma tamalom na'lo. So why then does the pasuk use the word na'lo, which is in the possessive form, meaning his, when it doesn't have to be his? The Gemara says that na'alo tells me something else. Na'aloi haroi lo. A shoe that is fit for him. Now, when we say is fit for him, we mean that quite literally. Prat legodoil she'ein yochol alach bo, to the exclusion of a shoe that's oversized, that if he were to wear it, he wouldn't be able to walk in it. Uprat lekotten she'ein choife roiv raglo, also to the exclusion of a shoe that's too small, that doesn't cover the majority of his foot. Uprat lesandol hamisulayim she'ein lo okev, and to the exclusion of this kind of sandal misulayim. Rashi says hanifchas, it's missing, it's depleted. Nifchas word pachos, it's missing. What is it missing? Shein lo okev, it doesn't have a heel. The pasuk then na'alo excludes a sandal misulayim that doesn't have the heel. Abaye have a koi kamei de Rav Yosef. Asoi Yevama lachlot. Abaye was standing in the presence of Rav Yosef, and a Yevama approached who needed chalitza. Omar lei. Rav Yosef said to Abaye, have lei, give to the Yavam sandloch, your shoe. Yohiv lei sandala de smola. So Abaye gave him the shoe that fit his left foot. The Rashi says, Yohiv lei de smola b'miskaven ovad. He did this deliberately. The lo svira lei la'Abaye the sandal she'ein shelo muter lechatchila. Abaye doesn't hold that using someone else's shoe is a good first choice. So we continue in the Gemara. Omar lei. So Rav Yosef says, Eimar de omur rabbanan dieved. The use of a left shoe to be removed from the right foot, that's something that's only good post facto, but as a first choice, is that something to do? So why are you giving him, as before the act was done, why are you giving him the left shoe? The Gemara continues, Omar le, Abaye says back, Ihachi, if what you're worried about, if what you're concerned about is doing things in the first choice fashion, sandal she'ein sheloi nami, using someone else's shoe as well, Eimar de Omer Rabbanan dieved. The Rabbanan accept that only post facto, but lechatchila mi omur. But as a first choice, who says? And you yet are asking me to give him my shoe. It's not going to be his. It'll be his. It's mine. So if smoil bothers you because it's not lechatchila, ein shelo is also not lechatchila. Omar lei, Rav Yosef responds, I guess you didn't understand me when I said give him your shoe. Hachi ko amino lach. Thusly, I am really saying to you, Hav lei v'akni lei, give him the shoe, transfer the shoe to him, and grant him acquisition of it. Akni lei, that he should acquire the shoe, so that for this particular ceremony, it will be literally his. Sandal shel eitz. So our Mishnah said that that's sheira. Mantana, who accepts a wooden shoe as a sufficient, as a valid chalitza shoe. You'll see that we have two approaches. Number one, Omar Shmuel, Rebbe Meir he. This is in accordance with Rebbe Meir. The Snan, Hakitea Yoitze Bekav Shaloi Divrei Rebbe Meir. A amputee can walk out on Shabbos with his prosthetic leg, his prosthetic foot, which is called a kav. He can go from one domain to another, which indicates it's an article of clothing for him. It's a shoe for him. That's Rabbi Meir's opinion. And this kav is made of wood, so that you see that something that's wood is considered a shoe. Rabbi Yossi disagrees, but we want to focus right now on Rabbi Meir, and you can see from his halacha regarding Shabbos that he's viewing a wooden entity as a shoe. Avur de Shmuel Omer, Avur de Shmuel says that as far as our Mishnah is concerned, you don't have to limit it to the singular opinion of Rabbi Meir, but rather b'mechupa or v'divrei hakol. The Mishnah that spoke about a sandal shalates is really a shoe made of wood but covered in leather. So that makes it considered leather according to all opinions, and not just a Rabbi Meir opinion. Before we continue, you'll notice we have a double underlining marking on the side. We have a nosei, mivneh heading. The double underline represents Shnei Deos Barava, two opinions as to what Rava holds. We'll see, we've underlined in the Gemara of Popi and Rav Papa. Each one of them has an opinion as to what Rava says. Binyan Chalitza Benal Muchlat Benegoim. Muchlat is a term that has relevance to the realm of tzoras. This is a situation where the mitzora is no longer is in the state of doubtful tzoras, but he's been determined to have definite tzoras. Without getting into the details, because that's an entire discussion in the Torah. Many psukim are dedicated to this topic, but just realize that something that in the realm of tzoras, in negoyim, there's something that's called muchlat. An article of clothing that is muchlat, it is to be burnt. So now we turn to the Gemara. Omar of Popi, Mishmei de Rava, Sandal HaMusgar. Now, musgar is the situation where an article of clothing is afflicted with negoim, with tzoras, but it's not determined to be certain tzoras. So the individual it's locked away, so to speak, for a week. That's the period of time called musgar. So sandal hamuzgar, if the sandal is afflicted with this discoloration that we refer to as tzoras, but it hasn't been determined to be definitive tzoras, lo tachlotz bo, it's not useful, it's not good for chalitza. Ve'im cholza chalitza siksher. If the sandal hamusgar was used for chalitza, it nevertheless is acceptable. We should mention that the musgar is a situation. It's like a waiting period in which we wait to see what happens with regard to the affliction. Does it expand? And if it would, then it would be declared muchlat and it would have to be burnt. But in the meantime, it's musgar. Now, something that has to be burnt, in your mind's eye, even before it's burnt, one might view it as if it's not there because of its destiny. If it's destined to be burnt, it would be viewed as not there, and then it would, if it's viewed as not there, so then you have a situation where something we have a requirement of size, but something that's not there doesn't have size. So the muskar, since it's not destined as it is now to be burnt, the chalitza done with it is kosher. However, sandal hamuchlat, a sandal which has been determined to have definite tzoras, and as a result of that, it is to be burnt. As Rashi says, muchlat chalitza sapsula del sreifakoi. It is destined to be burnt. Vanan shiur boinon. We in chalitza have a dimension that is required. Choifes roiv ragloi. V'hai kedusi mechtas shiurei. The muchlat is in your mind's eye considered as if it's smashed and non-existent. So we go back to the Gemara with Rav Papi having made this distinction between the musgar and the muchlat, and where he says that you shouldn't use a sandal muchlat. Ve'im chaltza chalitza psula. If she removed a sandal that's been determined to be muchlat from the brother-in-law's foot, it's ineffective. It's called a chalitza psula. It's certainly ineffective in allowing her to marry someone else. Rav Papa Mishmei de Rava Omar, Echad sandal hamusgar ve'echad sandal hamuchlat lo tachlos bo v'im chaltza chalitza kshera. So you have a more lenient approach to things, that of Rav Papa quoting Rava, that even the muchlat, though it's not a good first choice, but if you did it, it's kosher, it's effective. So that you can see, according to Rav Papa, as opposed to Rav Papi, Rav Papa is saying that even though something is destined to be burnt, that doesn't mean that we view it right now as if it's not there. Meisvei. Now, on the side of the Gemara, we have an introduction to these triangles where we've noted the triangle Kushos al Rav Papi. These are questions that are directed against Rav Papi. Rav Papi was the more restrictive of the opinions, holding that a muchlat is not suitable for chalitza. Meisvei. As we said, we're now going to be asking on Rav Papi. Rav Papi had pointed out that a sandal ha-muchlot is unacceptable, is invalid for chalitza, and the reason being because since it is destined to be burnt, it is viewed currently as if it's non-existent. So it is lacking the required dimension, which was roiv raglo, the majority of the foot. What do we see in this source? Bias hamuzgar. Do note, by the way, that it's the question lasts a couple of lines. We're referring now to a house that's afflicted with tsaras. Bias hamuzgar metamim mitochoi vamuchlot mitocho umeachorov. A house that's in its musgar state, that's the interim state where we're waiting to determine whether it's a full-fledged, full-blown case of nigei botim, so it will communicate defilement from within. If a person puts his hand into the house and touches the wall inside a house that's musgar, he will become tomei. A muchlot house will communicate tumah not only from within but from the outside as well. V'zeh metamin b'biyah. Biyah means entrance. Both a muchlot and both a musgar and muchlot will make a person who walks inside the house, even without touching the walls, simply by walking inside the house, he will become tomei. If you view something that is destined to be destroyed as if it is currently destroyed, the pasuk that refers to a person becoming tamei upon entering a house that's afflicted, he has to enter the house. But if it's considered destroyed because of that, its eventuality, so he hasn't walked into a house, it's a pile of rubble. The Gemara says, shiny hasam, that case is different. Meaning, in general, something that's destined to be burnt or destroyed is viewed currently as destroyed, as non-existent. But the case of the house that's muchlad is different. Diyamar kra, maybe we didn't point out emphatically enough, a house that is muchlad is to be knocked down. So then, if it's to be knocked down, and we say ketuse mechtas shiur, why is there tumah upon entering such a house? If, after all, the house in our mind's eye is not there. So the Gemara says that shiny house in that case is different. Yom Kro v'nitatz es habayis. You shall smash the house. Afilu b'shas netitza korui bayis. Even at the point that it is smashed, the word bias is still appropriate, is still applicable. So in halachic terms, even though it's smashed, it's still considered a house. but that's limited to the case of the bias amenuga because of the pasuk. So just to repeat that last point, because of this pasuk which says v'notatz es habayis, that's in Vayikra Perek Yud Dalet pasuk Mem Hey, we learn that even though it is destined to be smashed, the term bias, the term house, nevertheless applies to it. Ta Shma. And we continue with another example from the realm of Nigoyim. Here we talk about a piece of fabric that's afflicted with tzoras. Matlis, it's a piece of fabric. Sheyesh bo sholosh al sholosh, if it has the size of 3 by 3 fingers. Afal pi she'ein bo kezayis. It's made of very thin material, so that when you, let's say, fold it up or roll it up, it doesn't have a kezayis, an olive quantity of fabric. Kevon shenichnas ruba lebayis tahor. If the majority of this piece of fabric enters a house that is tahor, temaseu, it makes the house tomei. My lav muchletes. Are we not in fact talking about a piece of fabric that has been determined to be muchlat? And in order for fabric to be significant enough to communicate tumah, it has to have a minimum dimension. As you can see here, 3 by 3 fingers. So what are we in effect saying? Even though it's going to be burnt, that doesn't affect the shiur. And we won't say kitusei mechtas shiur, a kasha on Rav Papi, who had said that using a muchlat shoe is invalid for chalitza. So how come over here do we say that the fabric is still viewed as if it's there? And if we're talking about fabric that's muchlat, the Gemara says, no, we're not talking about fabric that's muchlat. Lo, musgeres. It's musgar. Musgar means it's in the waiting period. It's not determined to be definite tzoras. So even Rav Papi acknowledges if it's not definite tzoras, so it still has its dimensions. Question: Ihachi Eimoseifa. Note the length of this question. Well, if that be the case, if it's musgar, so then let's continue reading the source and see if we can do so with this in mind. Hoyu bo kamo zeisim. The fabric has several olive quantities present. Kefon shenichnas mimeno kezayis labayis tor temasehu. Once a kezayis quantity of the fabric enters a house that is tor, it will communicate tumah to the contents of the house. If you say very well that we're talking about a case of muchlat, hainu de iskish lemeis. When you're dealing with tzoras at the muchlat level, we know that it is compared to the dead, and the dead defiles when you have an olive quantity of corpse material, of corpse substance, that communicates defilement of the dead. We call tumas meis. And this source, which is talking about an afflicted piece of fabric, makes reference to a kezayis quantity. So if you say that the source is talking about muchlat is compared to meis, hence we have a basis for the olive quantity. Eloyamris musgeres. But if you say that it's talking about fabric that hasn't reached the muchlat stage, it's only musgeres, amai iskish lemeis. Why the reference to an olive quantity which indicates a comparison to the dead? Let's take a look at Rashi. Rashi is just a couple lines up from here. Amris bishlama muchletes hainu de metame bekezayis afilu ein kan beged sholosh al sholosh. If you have a kezayis quantity, even if it lacks 3 by 3 fingers, you're talking about rather thick type fabric, so it will be metame mishum de muchlat iskish lemeis umeis metame bekezayis, because muchlat is compared to the dead, and the dead communicate tuma when you have an olive quantity. The heicha iskish, where is that comparison? Dirtiv, it says in the Torah, al no tehi kames. This is Moshe Rabbeinu praying for the healing of his sister Miriam. She Miriam musgeres havoy v'koma le'aron l'Moshe al no techalet shelo tehei kames. She was in a state of musgar. She was afflicted with tsaras, and what Aaron prayed, or Aaron beseeched. I actually made a slight error before. It wasn't Moshe Rabbeinu's prayer. It was Aaron beseeching Moshe to seek her healing, so that she would not become muchlat and hence be like the dead. So you see from this that someone who reaches muchlat is compared to the dead. The Gemara answers, Ella shiny hasam, the Omar Kro, that basically muchlat in general, we will say kituse mechtas shiura. And as far as the source concerning the fabric is concerned, you see that we have to set it up as muchlat. If that be the case, so how in the world can we speak about the fabric as being 3x3 fingers and the majority of it going into the house? If you're talking about muchlat, then it should lack the shiur and not mitama the house when it goes in, because it's considered as if it's not there. So we answer as follows. As we said, in general, muchlat is considered mechtas shiur. It's lacking. Its dimensions are destroyed, are smashed, are non-existent. But as far as the din of muchlat by fabric, the Omar Kro, the pasuk says v'saraf es habeged, which means, and that of course is in the context of the cloth afflicted with saras. Afilu b'shas sreifa, even when it's being burnt, karui beged, it's called a beged. So that we have on the one hand a principle, and on the other hand we have we'll say an exception, a second exception here in the case of the fabric, just like we saw before with regard to the house that was muchlat, and nevertheless it's still considered a house because of the pasuk v'not tatzes abayis. Here we have the pasuk v'sarfas habeged. The Gemara asks v'ligmar minei, why not learn from here? Let this serve as a precedent, and then a shoe that is muchlat is considered still a shoe, having the dimensions, and it would be fit for chalitza. The Gemara responds, Isur mituma lo gamrinan. In Torah law, there are different categories. Exactly how to accurately translate them, I can't guarantee I'll do justice, but you have, for example, the realm of mominus, the whole realm concerning monetary matters. You have the realm of tuma, which has to do with the realm of defilement, and then the third realm, which we would maybe call the realm of ritual law. I don't know if that's a good translation, but it's not the area of defilement, and it's not the area of monetary matters. It will concern the area, in our case, of releasing the woman in the context of chalitza. Otherwise, she's isur, she's prohibited to marry out. So these are two different realms of halacha with their own standards. And if you're suggesting to me to learn from the realm of defilement to the realm of chalitza, which is the realm of isur, cross realms do not lend themselves to concluding one from the other. And that's what the Gemara means here. Isur mituma lo gamrina. So that even though in the realm of tuma, which is the realm in which saras is found, you might have something that, though destined to be destroyed, is nevertheless viewed as still there, but in the realm of Isur, something that is destined to be destroyed is viewed as if it right now is not there. And hence a shoe that's muchlat, Rav Papi will tell you, you cannot use for chalitza. Omar Rava, Hilchasa, Echad sandal hamusgar, the Echad sandal shemuchlot, the Echad sandal shel avodas kechavim, whether it be a shoe that's musgar or muchlat, which we mentioned before, and the muchlat is something that's destined to be burnt, and likewise a shoe that is part of an idol or idolatry. Imagine an idol is adorned with shoes, so it's considered something in the service of the idol. All of these things, lo tachlots, don't use them for chalitza. V'im chalza chalitzasa kshera. If post facto they were used, so it's nevertheless valid. Before we go further, just a point that we will look into in the Rashi. Shel avodas kechavim shenoelim oisei litzelim, shoes that are put onto an idol. Beraglov, if it's a statue that has a form of feet, so the shoe is put onto its feet. Kishemasian oisei mimokum l'mokum, it's put on its feet when it's being transferred from one place to another. So we said that the chalitza is acceptable. Now, if we look into the Rashi, chalitza kshera, you'll find something very interesting. Now, Rav Papi before had given us an approach saying that isura mi tuma lo yalfinon, they don't learn from cross topics. However, if we look at this Rashi, where he's commenting on this ruling, the ruling of Rava, that muchlat, a sandal that's muchlat is yes acceptable. Muchlat kidamoran, Rashi says, shafilu b'shas sreifa kori beged, that even when it is to be burnt, it is called an article of clothing, that we saw v'sarfas habeged, we saw that pasuk quoted before. And what about the fact that this is a different realm? We're dealing with Isur, and that pasuk is from the realm of Tumah. The lav meilafu. So this is very significant on the part of Rashi, that it's not a function here of my learning or my discovering a point of law from one realm to another. Elogilui milsa bi'almahu. It's a mere revelation of that which existed all the time. It's an exposure of something, of a reality that existed before. And what we mean by that is that the Torah reveals that which is that a muchlat, which is to be burnt, is still called what it is originally. That applies across the boards. The Torah reveals that in the context of tzaras with regard to tumah, but it applies to all cases of articles of clothing. And again, it's not a function of my learning, my deriving the topic of Isur from the topic of Tumah. That's what Rashi is addressing when he says Valav meilafu. I'm not learning one from the other. Rashi goes on saying Nami hoyov lilucha avid umeshamshi avidis kechavim, since it's designed for the transportation of the idol. When it's being moved, so shoes are put on it. It's serving the idol. It's called umeshamshi avidis kechavim lav l'sreifa kaimi. The articles that are in service of an idol are not destined to be burnt. They can be rendered permissible through an idol worshipper declaring it null and void. Now we turn back to the Gemara itself. Rava linked together the sandal amusgar and the sandal shemuchlad and the sandal shel avodas kechavim, which we said was misham she'avodah zara. It's not omeid l'sreifa. Therefore, the chalitza, if done post facto, is valid. However, shel takroivos avedis kechavim. This is an item that is offered to an idol. If, let us say, someone offered a pair of shoes to an idol as a gift to it, that's called takruvas avedis kechavim. This is something that cannot be nullified at a later point. It's takruvas avedis kechavim is compared to the dead, and therefore, since it has no nullification, it has no reparation, we will see that the chalitza done with takruvas avedis kechavim, a shoe that was offered as a gift to an idol, that will be a chalitza that's invalid. Well, and in addition to that, we continue at the top of Daf Kuf Daled Amud Aleph, V'shel Ir Hanidachas, a shoe that comes from a city of idol worship. The rule of such a city is that the offenders are killed by the sword, and all of its contents are destroyed. So the contents of an Ir Hanidachas are to be burnt. So a shoe from an Ir Hanidachas is going to be burnt. V'shel zokein ha'osui l'chvodo. This is an expression that refers to shrouds, something that is made for the dead. It's not a shoe then that's made for walking, so it's not considered a shoe, as Rashi says. Lo tachlots, with these items one shall not do chalitza. With these sources of different shoes, one shall not do chalitza. V'im cholza, chalitza sapsula. If one were to use the shoe that's a takrovas avedis kechavim, or a shoe from an Ir Hanidachas, or a shoe that was made for the benefit of a corpse, those are shoes that are invalid for chalitza. Omalei Ravina l'Ravashi, my shna zokein ha'osui l'chvodo delav lehilucha avid. What is different about the shoe that's made for the corpse? It's a shoe, and we said it's invalid because it's not made for walking. If it's not made for walking, it can't be called halachically a shoe. Again, halachically. When you look at it objectively, it appears to be a shoe, but halachically, you can't view it as a shoe. Well, why? Because it's not made for walking. Debei dino nami, the official chalitza shoe of the courts. It's a shoe that's, as we say, it's an official court shoe. Nami lav lehiluchov, it's not made for walking around. Omalei, so Ravashi says back to Ravina, ilu maski bei shlucha de beidina, mi kopid olei beidina. If a court emissary would actually put on that shoe, the shoe that's designated for chalitza, would anyone be upset with him? No, people wouldn't mind, they wouldn't be upset with him, so that you see that it has the potential for walking use, as opposed to the shoe that's made for the corpse. No one is going to walk around with that. So, up to this point then, we finished Rava's Psak, where he lists several shoes that are suitable for chalitza, included in which was the sandal hamuchlat, which to us was kind of a surprise. It was a chiddush there, that even though Rava is subscribing to the concept of kitusei mechta shiura, nevertheless a muchlat, because of a gzeres hakasa, because of a pasuk, it's not considered, the pasuk will say, overrules the concept of kitusei mechta shiura with regard to an article of clothing, and the shoe coming under the realm of beged.